All right, let's jump back in time. We're going to 1987. The world was really at a crossroads then, reeling from a bunch of man-made catastrophes. It was a weird moment, right? Because the very industrial engine that was creating all our wealth was also causing unbelievable destruction. So, in response, a group of global leaders got together to try and draft a blueprint for the future.
So let's really set the scene here. The mid-1980s they were just marked by this terrifying string of disasters. You had this lethal gas leak in Bhopal, India, the nuclear fallout from Chernobyl spreading all across Europe. The world was getting a really stark, really brutal lesson in the dangers of its own progress. I mean, every headline was like a blaring warning sign that something was profoundly wrong.
And the thing is, these weren't just isolated tragedies. They were all symptoms of a much deeper systemic problem. Our relentless pursuit of development was pushing the planet's natural systems and, us to a breaking point. So the United Nations formed a special commission to try and find a path forward. They had to answer a pretty critical question. How can humanity possibly progress without engineering its own destruction?
Okay, and this is where it starts to get really interesting. The Commission's first big insight was that we were looking at our problems all wrong. We were treating things like environmental protection and economic development and social issues like poverty as if they were all separate challenges that you could solve in their own little boxes. The Commission basically said, nope, that's a fatal error.
So that led them to this really fundamental question, one that just challenged decades of conventional wisdom. The Commission's big report in 1987, it was called Our Common Future, and it dared to ask if the plight of the world's poorest people was truly separate from the health of the planet itself.
And the report's conclusion? Absolutely groundbreaking. It just laid it out there. Poverty and pollution are two sides of the very same coin. You can't solve environmental crises without tackling poverty, because poverty often forces people to overexploit their resources just to survive day to day. And you can't have lasting development on a planet that's degraded. They are, as the report put it, an inseparable knot.
This powerful insight gave birth to a concept that, honestly, still guides us to this day. Sustainable development. The idea is so simple, but it's also incredibly profound. We can improve our lives now, but we have a duty to make sure that future generations can do the same. It's like we're just borrowing this planet, right? And we can't return it to them completely bankrupt.
So if development and the environment are fundamentally linked, then industry stood right at the center of this huge dilemma. It was the engine of all our progress, lifting our standards of living, but it was also the #1 source of the pollution and resource depletion that threatened that very same progress.
First off, just think about the sheer scale of the industrial boom the world had already seen. In just a few decades after World War II, the global output of manufactured goods had exploded. It increased 7-fold. I mean, this was an absolutely unprecedented expansion of human activity, and of course its impact on the planet.
And here was the real challenge. To bring the benefits of modern life to billions of people still living in poverty, the world would need to multiply its industrial output by another 5 to 10 times. But how in the world was that possible when the industrial base we already had was causing acid rain, chemical spills, and global contamination?
Faced with this seemingly impossible paradox, this need for massive growth on a planet that was already showing signs of collapse, the report didn't call for an end to growth. Not at all. Instead, it proposed something radical but also deeply pragmatic, a whole new philosophy for industry itself.
This simple phrase, it captures the absolute heart of the report's recommendation for industry. The answer wasn't to stop producing, it was to fundamentally change how we produce. The goal was no longer just more growth, but a better, smarter, and way more efficient quality of growth.
So this new industrial model was basically built on 3 core strategies. First, radical efficiency, just wringing more value out of every drop of water, every watt of energy, every ton of raw material. Second, designing pollution out of the system from the very beginning. And third, treating waste not as something to be thrown away, but as a resource to be fed right back into the production cycle.
What we're talking about here is a complete paradigm shift. It's moving away from that linear take, make, waste model that had defined the whole industrial age. Instead, it imagines a circular, much more intelligent system where the output of one process becomes the input for another, kind of mimicking the waste-free cycles we see in nature.
But the report's authors were really clear about something else. Even the most efficient, pollution-free factory in one country couldn't solve a problem that just refuses to respect national boundaries. The planet's ecosystems are all interconnected, and so are the threats to them. This was such a critical observation. The acid rain that was generated in one nation's power plants was killing forests hundreds of miles away in another country. Chemical spills, like that one in the Rhine River, poisoned waters that flowed through multiple countries. Pollution, as the report argued, doesn't carry a passport.
So a central takeaway was the absolute need for strong international cooperation. The report called for a global system to manage dangerous materials. This meant strict controls on exporting hazardous chemicals, a system to track toxic waste so it doesn't just get dumped on the world's poor, and shared responsibility when one country's pollution harms another.
And that kind of brings us to our final lingering question, doesn't it? This remarkably clear and really forward-thinking blueprint for a cleaner, more efficient, more equitable industrial world was laid out decades ago. The technologies and the strategies it called for are more advanced now than ever. And yet, the challenges it identified, they're still profoundly urgent. It really leaves you wondering, if we've had the blueprint for so long, what's stopping us from finishing the job?